Hey folks, tonight we're peeking into the private little medicine chest of a historical titan, Alexander the Great, the man who collected empires like rare trading cards and faced down war elephants even before breakfast. But what about when? The brutal reality of battle exacted its price in excruciating pain and paralyzing fear. The kind that turned the battlefield into a living hell where the son weeps and the mother doesn't see. Was it all just grin and bear it? Or was there a magical powder kept in a leather pouch by his waist, an almost divine elixir for facing the chaos, something we'd today recognize as the potent and addictive fentanyl of the ancient world? Used to keep the war machine running and heroes, well, heroic till their last breath. Yes, get ready, because tonight we're talking about opium. Before the first poppy is harvested in our narrative, or before the reality of ancient campaigns gives you an overdose of harshness, an invitation. Hit that like button and subscribe if you also believe history is way crazier and sometimes more doped up than textbooks let on, especially here on the Boring Testament. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to know who's with us on this mind-bending but calm journey through the poppy fields of antiquity. All right now, pull your favorite blanket up to your neck, adjust those headphones just right, maybe cover your eyes with that sleep mask, and let's together explore the opiate secrets that perhaps cradled the dreams or nightmares of antiquity's greatest conqueror. You think the opioid crisis is a terribly modern invention, a 21st century scourge with its synthetic pills and movie-worthy cartels. Hold on to your diluted wine, standard drink for any self-respecting Macedonian wanting to keep their liver intact. Because today we're discussing a substance that was, for Alexander's world, the fentanyl equivalent in terms of sheer power, relief bordering on the divine, and an overwhelming potential for a nosedive straight into the abyss. Opium. Extracted from Papaver somniferum, the ever-popular opium poppy, this milky, potent sap was no obscure novelty in Alexander's time. The Sumerians knew it as hulgil, the joy plant, millennia before. Egyptians used it in medicinal preparations and funeral rites, perhaps to ensure a smoother journey to the afterlife. Greeks, including Hippocrates, father of medicine, openly acknowledged its powerful analgesic and sedative properties. Opium was, in essence, the aspirin of antiquity, the Valium of the desperate, and for some the express ticket to artificial paradises. And Alexander, marching through regions where the poppy flourished, Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, Persia, even India, certainly had ample contact with its effects and availability. Now, try to place yourself in the worn-out sandals of a Macedonian soldier. Not exactly a five-star tour. Endless marches under a brutal sun, bloody battles with spears, swords, and the occasional war elephant trying to turn your phalanx into a paste. Injuries were routine, deep infected cuts, broken bones crudely set. Diseases like dysentery decimated, more men than many battles. In this scenario of constant pain and chronic exhaustion, opium wasn't a decadent vice. It was often the first aid kit of the truly desperate, the only magic potion capable of silencing the body's screams and allowing a few precious hours of oblivion, or at least a blessed stupor where war elephants seemed like large grey poodles. Was it opium, a secret additive for combat performance, to inject that extra courage before facing a Persian phalanx? Ancient historians are discreet on such military doping. But we can speculate, a small dose to calm nerves before a battle where chances of returning whole were depressing. Perhaps not in Philip II's official code, but who could blame a soldier for seeking a momentary reprieve? The Greek iatroi, army doctors, certainly knew opium's properties for treating severe dysentery and inducing sleep in men tormented by pain or trauma. And what would this Macedonian soldier, or Alexander, himself in moments of weariness, feel upon first trying opium? Using modern docudrama language, we might call it an instant supernova of relief, an astral projection without leaving your sweaty chainmail. Opium, binding to the brain's opioid receptors, the same ones your body uses for natural endorphins. When you get an unexpected compliment, doesn't ask permission. It floods the system. Imagine that throbbing spear wound simply vanishes, not lessens, not becomes manageable. It evaporates like a politician's promise. That icy knot of anxiety before battle, replaced by a warm wave of calm, a serene indifference that disconnects you from worries like being trampled by a Persian horse. The crushing fatigue, it dissolves into an almost dreamlike lightness. For a man far from home, body ground down by war, soul tattered by brutality, a dose of opium must have seemed a divine embrace, a glimpse of Elysium. For a few hours, he wasn't an anonymous cog. He was at peace, perhaps even happy. Of course, quality control and dosage in the 4th century BC weren't exactly 2025 pharmacy grade. No precisely dosed pills, no controlled release patches. Opium was consumed raw as a resinous paste or mixed with wine or honey. Potency was a lottery, depending on harvest, preparation, and who knows, the preparer's mood. The line between medicinal relief, recreational euphoria, and lights out for good was dangerously thin. A game of Russian roulette with poppy petals. It was like trying to guess the god's Wi-Fi password. One wrong try, and you were offline permanently. And this, dear nocturnal explorers, was just the beginning of the problem. The trailer for a long, often tragic story will continue to unravel. And so, our intrepid Macedonian soldiers, or perhaps even higher-ranking figures in Alexander's army, after experiencing that embrace of the gods provided by opium, that celestial relief from the excruciating pains of body and soul on campaign, would discover the hard way that every artificial paradise has its price. And the bill, my dear nocturnal explorers, was usually exorbitant and charged with cruel interest. That trailer of a tragic story we mentioned, well, the main feature is about to begin. The human brain, this incredibly complex machine and, in many ways, still a mystery to our 2025 science, was not designed to handle such an intense and artificial flood of pleasure as that provided by a potent opioid like opium. That feeling of being in heaven, that euphoria that made the brutal world of war seem like a distant dream. It was too good to be true, and certainly too good to last. The brain, in its adaptive wisdom, or, in this case, in its treacherous trap, begins to think, wow, if this feels so good, it must be absolutely essential for survival. I need more of this. The reward center, normally activated by things like food, sex, or an unlikely victory over the Persians, gets completely fried, unregulated, begging for more of that transcendental sensation. The problem is, as with any toxic relationship, the first high is always the best. That first experience, that supernova of pleasure, will never be repeated with the same intensity. You can try chasing that initial feeling like a hound after a bone ignored to the marrow, but it will be an increasingly frustrating hunt. And now, back in the real world, the contrast becomes brutal. Breakfast tastes like military camp breakfast again. The pains from that old leg wound return with a vengeance, and the need to work hard for any glimmer of happiness, hormones, seems an unbearable burden. Comparison, as the saying goes, is the thief of joy. And now, ordinary life, with its small miseries and modest pleasures, has to compete with the memory of an almost divine ecstasy, irreparable damage to the perception of reality and to the self. And believe me, this isn't even the worst part. Opioids are incredibly addictive, and the dependence they create is among the cruelest a human being can experience. Brace yourselves for the supernova of pain. After a few doses of opium, even if spaced out, the brain, that hard-working organ, has had enough. The cells controlling pain and pleasure, constantly bombarded by the substance and kept in a state of euphoric stupor, decide it's time to react. They don't just wake up, they go on high alert, becoming hyperactive. This is tolerance setting in, and it happens fast, sometimes within a few days of use. The pleasant effects you sought in opium begin to diminish drastically. To feel anything. Like before, you'd need much higher doses. And here our Macedonian soldier finds himself at a dangerous crossroads. Quit and face the storm of withdrawal, allowing his system to return to normal, which in the middle of a military campaign doesn't. Seem like a very attractive option. Or keep going, increasing the dose, hoping to recapture the magic. Many, understandably, would take the wrong turn. In the following weeks, the brain continues its rebellion, and the user keeps upping the dose. The effects are no longer the glory of before, but they still bring a numbing relief, a momentary escape, until one day the opium supply fails. The merchant was captured, the caravan attacked, or the contact simply vanished. And that's when our hero discovers that his own body has become his worst enemy. Welcome to Withdrawal, the Old Testament on steroids version. The body's systems, now so hyperactive and conditioned to the opioid's presence, begin to scream in its absence, making you feel the exact opposite of what the drug provided. That euphoria and happiness, replaced by an inability to feel pleasure in anything. Breakfast, if any, is tasteless. The camaraderie of companions, irritating. Your loved ones, a distant, painful memory. A storm of negative emotions sweeps away the previous sea of calm. Serenity gives way to a gnawing anxiety, a constant dread, as if something terrible is about to happen at any moment. Your worries, insecurities, and all the fears you suppressed with opium not only return but are amplified to the level of an existential crisis. You become so restless you can't sit still. Your heart pounds like an uncontrolled war drum. You shiver, sweat, hyperventilate. Your pain circuits, now hypersensitive, make your bones and muscles ache terribly for no apparent reason. Old wounds, physical and mental, return to haunt you with the intensity of a vengeful ghost. Abdominal cramps double you over, diarrhea and vomiting empty you. You're too agitated to rest, too exhausted to fight. A civil war inside your own body, a prison from which there's no escape. And of course, there's the excruciating craving. A primal scream from your mind and body, begging for another dose, just one, to make all this hell stop. This torment can last for weeks, or it can stop immediately with another sip of that bitter elixir. So why not just keep using opium forever and feel amazing all the time? You might ask with seductively simple logic. The cruel catch is that it doesn't work that way. The body develops tolerance to the good effects, like euphoria, much faster than to the bad ones, like dangerously slow breathing. So what starts as a touch of the universe's love center quickly turns into a desperate quest for a numbing stupor and mostly relief from the horrors of withdrawal. You no longer use opium to get to heaven, but to desperately try to escape the hell it has created within you. A mental and physical prison, cutting you off from everyone and everything that could actually bring you some genuine comfort or happiness. Opioid addiction is brutal and incredibly hard to escape, even with all the support of modern 2025 medicine. Imagine then in Alexander's world, where understanding of neurochemistry was nil, and the most common treatment for any ailment was, well, maybe more opium or a good bloodletting. It becomes clear that contact with the fentanyl of antiquity, even if initially out of necessity or curiosity, was playing with a fire that could consume not just one soldier, but entire legions, undermining the strength and morale of the most powerful army in the known world, one casualty at a time, silently and insidiously here on the Boring Testament. After the initial supernova of pleasure, and the subsequent brutal supernova of pain, of dependence and withdrawal, which transformed valiant Macedonian soldiers into trembling shadows of their former selves, a question hangs in the dusty air of Alexander's camp. If opium was such a treacherous substance, with such devastating potential for the individual, why was it so present, so available, almost like a common commodity in the ancient world? The answer, my dear nocturnal explorers of the boring testament, may lie not just in the human quest for relief or ecstasy, but also in the age-old familiar logic of the market. After all, for some, opium wasn't a problem, it was an excellent business model. Remember the fentanyl script that inspired this journey of ours, while for the user it's described as garbage heroin. For dealers, it's the dream drug, cheap to produce, easy to smuggle, incredibly potent in tiny doses, and, crucially, highly addictive, ensuring repeat clientele. Could opium, our fentanyl of antiquity, have shared some of these commercial advantages? First, production and roots. The opium poppy wasn't some rare plant Seongjanganli in secret sorcerers' gardens. It was cultivated in various regions that Alexander and his armies traversed or had contact with. Egypt, with its fertile fields along the Nile, Asia Minor, with its ancient traditions of using medicinal plants, Persia and the vast expanses of Central Asia, all the way to the borders of India. All these were producing areas or important hubs on the trade routes that transported spices, silks, incense, and yes, valuable opium. Imagine the camel and mule caravans, crossing deserts and mountains, not unlike the routes we discussed in our explorations of ancient trade. Amidst bolts of fabric, wine jars and metal bars, small leather pouches or ceramic containers held this dark, sticky resin, or perhaps the processed powder, worth its weight in, well, maybe not gold, but certainly a lot of silver or other bartered goods. Opium's potency was a logistical advantage. A small amount could have a significant effect, making it a high-value added product and relatively easy to transport compared to, say, a shipment of wine amphorae. An investment with a good return per kilo carried on a camel's back, or who knows, on that of a cunning smuggler. And the demand, the demand was constant and diverse. Doctors and healers needed it for their analgesic and sedative preparations. The basic kit for dealing with a world where a simple tooth infection could send you to a better or worse place. Priests might use it in rituals to induce trance states or to facilitate communication with the gods. After all, a slightly more relaxed congregation might be more receptive to divine messages. And, of course, there was its use for general pain relief and suffering. From the pains of childbirth to the torments of old age, not to mention soldiers wounded in endless campaigns. And here comes the insidious nature of the substance, its capacity to create dependence. Not that ancient opium merchants had loyalty programs with point cards and referral bonuses, like some 2025 phone companies, but the very pharmacology of the poppy ensured that once a client experienced its celestial relief and their body grew accustomed to its presence, they would likely return for more and more. Withdrawal, as we've seen, was not an experience anyone would willingly repeat. Thus, a captive market formed almost naturally. The house, or rather the supplier, almost always won. Could opium, with its effectiveness and addictive power, have begun to contaminate or displace other traditional remedies, perhaps less potent but also less dangerous? It's a difficult question to answer with certainty, but we can speculate. If you're in terrible pain and the local healer offers you an herbal tea that barely tickles, or an opium-laced preparation that sends you to the clouds and erases the pain instantly, which would you choose, especially if the understanding of long-term risks was limited, and the great conqueror Alexander? His campaigns, by unifying vast territories under a single rule, even if temporarily, may have, inadvertently or not, facilitated or altered the trade routes for these substances. A vaster empire with safer roads, relatively speaking, and a centralized administration could optimize the flow of goods, including those with special properties. Would Alexander's administration have tried to control or tax this lucrative trade? Or was it just another commodity among many pummel through his expanding empire? Historical records are more focused on battles and glory than on the pharmacoeconomics of opium. What we can say, with our nocturnal calm revolt, is that the dynamic seems timeless. Powerful substances that offer relief and pleasure, but also carry the potential for dependence and destruction. And behind them, there are always those who control the supply, who profit from the demand, whether it's a modern cartel with clandestine labs or an ancient merchant with his caravans crossing. Dusty roots, the joy plant of the Sumerians, the analgesic of Greek doctors, the relief of Alexander's soldiers, was also a source of wealth and power for those who knew how to exploit its properties and the eternal human desire to escape pain. And that, my friends of the boring testament, is a story as old as the poppies themselves blooming under the eastern sun. While the opium trade flourished in the shadows of great roots and in the coffers of astute merchants, as we saw in our last nocturnal conversation here at the Boring Testament, the central figure of our script, Alexander the Great, continued his relentless journey of conquest. But what was happening behind the facade of the invincible general, the demigod acclaimed by his soldiers? What burdens and pains did the man who carried the weight of an expanding empire on his shoulders bear? And more importantly for our investigation, today, could he, Alexander himself, have resorted to the fentanyl of antiquity to endure it all? The pressures on Alexander were, to use a modern understatement, a tad intense. Imagine the job description: conquer the known world, manage a multinational army with all its rivalries and complex logistics. Feeding and paying all those people was a daily miracle pani itself. Deal with palace conspiracies, found cities like one plants banana trees, and still have to maintain the divine pose, or at least that of a favorite of the gods. A typical day at Alexander's office would probably make a modern CEO resign and go sell crafts on the beach. Add to this his battle wounds, and Alexander collected some rather serious ones, from arrow strikes to sword gashes. The personal losses of close friends like Hephaestion, the growing paranoia that accompanies absolute power, and the immense loneliness that must come with being at the top of the pyramid, where everyone fawns over you, but few truly understand you. A full menu for anyone to seek a good therapist, or in the absence of a mental health professional in the 4th century BC, perhaps a small leather pouch with a magic powder and promises of relief. We know Alexander wasn't exactly a model of moderation in all aspects. His fondness for wine, especially in the later stages of his campaigns, is well documented and at times resulted in regrettable episodes. The death of his friend Clytus the Black during a fit of rage at a wine-soaked banquet is a tragic example. If alcohol already caused these minor slips in the great conqueror's self-control, what could an even more potent substance with such profound effects on mind and body, like opium, do or help endure? Here we enter the realm of careful speculation. As ancient historians, though detailed in battles and speeches, didn't usually record their heroes' medical prescriptions or their possible secret dependencies. There's no bronze plaque in Babylon saying, "Here Alexander took his daily dose of laudanum," but considering the ubiquity of opium as the most potent analgesic of the era, the number of times Alexander was severely wounded, and the unimaginable stress of his responsibilities, would it be so surprising if he had used it medicinally to control excruciating pain that would prevent him from riding Bucephalus or planning the next conquest? Or perhaps to combat the insomnia that must have haunted a man holding the fate of millions in his hands. The irony, for us at the Boring Testament, lies precisely in this possibility. The man who saw himself as a new Achilles, who sought immortality through glory, might have depended in his most vulnerable moments on a humble flower to continue his epic journey. The conqueror of the world, perhaps being in silence, conquered by the need for relief that only the poppy could offer. Could opium have influenced some of his more audacious or even erratic decisions? Is it possible that some of those incredibly grueling marches, those recorded outbursts of fury, or even those moments of apparent invincibility and superhuman charisma might have been, in some way, boosted or modulated by the influence of substances? These are provocative questions with no definitive answers, but they invite us to look at the figure of Alexander not just as a marble general, but as a complex human being, subject to the same frailties. And who knows, the same secret remedies as his humblest soldiers, and his premature death in Babylon at the age of 32. Officially, fever, perhaps malaria, typhoid, or the consequences of years of excess with alcohol and a body pushed to its limits. But could chronic use of opium for war pains, if it indeed occurred, have contributed to weakening his health, making him more susceptible? Once again, pure speculation. But when one lives on the edge, consuming the world and perhaps some potent substances to keep going, the body sooner or later presents the bill. And Alexander's, as we know, came early and somewhat anticlimactically for a man of such grandiose achievements. Humanizing Alexander in this way, imagining him not just as the demigod of war, but as a real man with real pains, real fears, and possibly resorting to the miraculous remedies of his time to keep moving forward, doesn't diminish his historical stature. On the contrary, perhaps it makes it even more tragically understandable. Glory has its price, and opium, with its seductive embrace and addictive claws, was one of the many currencies with which one could pay for temporary relief in the unforgiving theatre of life and war in the ancient world. And so, nocturnal explorers, after speculating on the presence of opium in the personal and military pharmacopoeia of Alexander the Great, the fentanyl of an ancient world where pain was a constant and relief, an often dangerous luxury, we reach the end of this particular journey through history's poppy fields. Alexander's glory, as we've seen, came at a price, and opium, with its seductive embrace and addictive claws, was undoubtedly one of the many currencies with which one could attempt to pay for temporary reprieve in the relentless theatre of life and war. But if Alexander, the man, the myth, the conqueror, eventually succumbed to the fevers of Babylon, what of the legacy of the substance that perhaps accompanied his armies? Did the poppy follow the Macedonian eagles, sinking deeper roots into the lands he united under his brief but blazing empire? It likely did. The Hellenistic period that followed Alexander's conquests saw an intensification of cultural and commercial exchange between East and West. Routes were opened, cities founded, and with the goods and armies, knowledge also traveled, including pharmacological knowledge, opium, already known and used medicinally by Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, and other peoples, certainly found fertile ground in this new cosmopolitan world. The great Hellenistic centers of learning, like Alexandria in Egypt, founded by our protagonist, of course, became melting pots of knowledge, where the wisdom of different cultures intermingled. It's reasonable to assume that the medicinal use of opium was further refined and disseminated during this era. The physicians and apothecaries of the Hellenistic period would hardly ignore a plant with such potent analgesic and sedative properties. The subtle irony, for us at the Boring Testament, lies in thinking that an empire forged by the sword and one man's ambition might have, inadvertently or not, also spread a flower that offered both the oblivion of pain and the peril of dependence. Alexander's conquests didn't just bring Greek culture to the East. They also brought the needs, vices, and remedies of a world in constant flux. But the story of opium, our fentanyl of antiquity, isn't just about Alexander or his soldiers. It's about a much deeper and more timeless human quest. The unceasing search for relief from pain, be it physical, emotional, or existential. Deep down, the Macedonian soldier crushed by exhaustion and wounds on a dusty battlefield, seeking a moment of peace in the poppy's sap, is not so fundamentally different from the modern individual seeking an escape from the pressures of a hyper-connected, anxious, and often painful world. The settings change, the substances evolve in potency and form, but the human search that endures stubbornly through the centuries. The opium poppy, with its delicate beauty and lethal power, is almost a perfect symbol of this ambiguity intrinsic to the human condition and perhaps to the divine dilemma that so intrigues us. A gift of nature that can be both a therapeutic blessing and an addictive curse, depending on the hand that harvests it, the intention that consumes it, and the wisdom, or lack thereof, that guides its use. In antiquity, without the pharmacological knowledge we possess today, that line was even thinner, and the risks immeasurably greater. Alexander the Great conquered the known world, but could he have been, on some more intimate level, unrecorded? By chroniclers, also a captive of the promise whispered by that flower, official history, always more interested in battles and imperial legacies, doesn't tell us these details. But the subtext, the speculations, and perhaps the poppy fields that still stubbornly bloom where his armies marched hold a silence, profoundly intoxicating. And so, as the night deepens and the veil of sleep begins to descend upon us, perhaps the real question echoing from this journey isn't just what Alexander used to endure his epic destiny, but what we, in our own daily battles, used to endure ours. A question perhaps without an easy answer, to leave floating in the smoke of centuries and the mists of our own dreams. May reflection, even if boring and nocturnal, bring us, if not answers, at least a deeper appreciation for the complex tapestry of the human experience.